Sit down. Nobody invited you to stand at this counter." Those were the first words the gate agent said to 17-year-old Naomi Carter at Hartsfield-Jackson International Airport, and they were said loud enough for 40 strangers to hear. Naomi hadn't even finished pulling her boarding pass out of her bag. She hadn't said a single word. She'd simply walked up to the priority lane at Gate C34, the way the sign told her to, holding a first-class ticket she had earned with her own hands and her own mind. And already, before she'd spoken, someone had decided who she was. This is the story of that morning, and of everything it set into motion. It's a story about a girl who was taught to stay calm when the world tried to make her small, and about a woman behind a counter who believed, right up until the very end, that cruelty wearing a uniform could still call itself professionalism. Stay with me, because what happens at the end of this story is not what either of them expected. Naomi Carter was 17 years old. 5'4", with box braids pulled into a low bun and a backpack so stuffed with textbooks that the zipper strained at the seams. She did not look like someone who had just beaten out 4,200 other students across the country. She looked like exactly what she was, a high school senior from the Vine City neighborhood of Atlanta, a few blocks from the house her grandmother had bought in 1974 with money saved from 31 years of cleaning offices downtown. Naomi's grandmother, Renata Carter, had passed 18 months earlier, but she had left Naomi one thing besides the house, a small enamel pin shaped like a phoenix, its wings of faded gold, pinned every single day to the strap of Naomi's backpack. Odessa used to say it out loud, like a small prayer, whenever Naomi doubted herself. "Rise anyway, baby. Rise anyway." Naomi had spent the last 2 years of high school waking at 5:30 in the morning, 3 days a week, to catch the first bus to the Auburn Avenue Research Library before class started, because the library had 2 computers, with the modeling software her school's computer lab didn't. She kept a composition notebook, the same brand, the same marbled black and white cover, every single time, filled with sketches of filtration membranes and half-finished equations in the margins, and on the inside cover, in her own handwriting from freshman year, was a single line she'd copied down after her grandmother's funeral. "You don't have to be loud to be certain." She had never shown that notebook to a single teacher. She didn't need anyone to see the work to know it was real. That, more than anything, was who Naomi Carter was. Someone who had already proven things to herself, quietly, 100 times over, long before anyone at a boarding gate would ever be given the chance to doubt her. Naomi had risen. 3 weeks earlier, in a packed auditorium in Washington, D.C., she had stood on a stage and watched her name appear on a screen above the words "First Place, Horizon Youth Innovators Summit," for a water filtration algorithm she'd built using a $50 microcontroller and 2 years of after-school Saturdays at the public library. The prize was a $40,000 scholarship, a 6-week research placement at Imperial College London, and 1 round-trip first-class ticket on Windward Air, flight WA218, Atlanta to London Heathrow, courtesy of the airline's sponsorship of the competition. Her mother, Dr. Renata Carter, had wanted to see her off that morning. She hadn't been able to. Renata was 44 years old, the executive vice president of customer experience for Windward Air. And at 6:15 that morning, she had been pulled into an emergency call with the airline's board of directors about a data breach affecting the loyalty program. Renata had FaceTimed her daughter instead, propped against a stack of case files in her home office, still in her robe, her voice thick with a pride she didn't try to hide. "You earned this, baby," Renata had said. "Every seat, every mile, every bit of it. Text me the second you're through security, and text me again when you land. I love you more than the sky you're about to fly through." "I love you too, Mom," Naomi had said, smiling so hard, her cheeks ached. And then she'd zipped her bag, kissed the Phoenix pin once for luck, and left for the airport at 7:40 in the morning, 3 hours before a flight that didn't board until 11:05. By 9:50, Naomi stood at the priority boarding lane of Gate C34, ticket in hand, watching the crisp blue and silver of the Windward Air livery through the window behind the counter. The gate agent processing passengers on the left was a man in his 50s named Marcus Bell, patient and unhurried, his tie slightly crooked, humming under his breath as he worked. The agent on the right, a woman whose brass name tag read D. Hollis, was a different kind of presence entirely. Denise Hollis was 51 years old, with a stiff blonde bob that hadn't moved in the Atlanta humidity, coral lipstick applied a shade too bright for her uniform, and eyes the color of pale glass that swept over the line with the flat, appraising look of someone counting inventory rather than serving people. She had worked the gates at Hartsfield-Jackson for 19 years. She would tell you, if you asked, that in 19 years, she had learned exactly who belonged in first class and who didn't, and that instinct, she believed, was the whole reason the airline paid her. Naomi stepped up to Denise's counter and offered her boarding pass and passport with both hands, the way her mother had taught her since she was a little girl. "Good morning," she said.
Passing.
Checking in for flight 0218 to London. Denise did not say good morning back. She looked at Naomi for 1 full second longer than any greeting required, her eyes tracking down from Naomi's face to her sneakers and back up again, and something in her expression tightened, like a hand closing slowly into a fist. "Sit down," Denise said. "Nobody invited you to stand at this counter." Naomi blinked. "I'm sorry. I'm just checking in. This is gate C34, right? For flight." "I know what gate this is," Denise cut in, her voice climbing just enough to reach the ears of the 11 or 12 people now lined up behind Naomi. "This is priority boarding. First class, business, platinum members. Economy check-in is at the counter, by the escalators, sweetheart, and it hasn't even opened yet." "I have a first-class ticket," Naomi said, holding it up. Right here. There it was. The first small silence, the kind that lands in a room like a dropped glass. Everyone hears it, nobody moves. Denise took the boarding pass from Naomi's hand, with 2 fingers, the way someone lifts a piece of trash off a clean table, and held it at arm's length, as though the paper itself might be contaminated. She read it slowly, deliberately, her coral lips curling. "First class," she repeated, and then she laughed. It wasn't a laugh anyone would call warm. It was short and sharp, cut off at the end like a slammed door. "Honey, this is real cute. Did you print this off at home? Because I've been doing this job 19 years, and I know exactly who flies up front on this airline, and it is not." She gestured, a small circular motion with 2 fingers, taking in Naomi's backpack, her sneakers, her braids. "It is not this." A few people in line laughed. Not everyone, but enough. Naomi felt the heat crawl up the back of her neck and settle behind her ears, the particular burn of being made a joke in front of strangers who would forget her face within the hour, but who, right now, in this exact minute, were looking at her like she was the funniest thing they'd seen all week. "This is my ticket," Naomi said again, and she kept her voice level, though it cost her something to do it. "It's valid. I won it. There's a scholarship attached, through the Horizon Youth Innovators Summit. Windward Air is one of the sponsors." "Won it," Denise said, drawing the word out, like taffy, like it was the most absurd sentence she'd ever been asked to entertain. She leaned forward, over the counter, dropping her voice into something that pretended at kindness and delivered contempt instead. "Look, I'm not trying to be ugly, but I've seen every kind of story at this counter, and I have never once, not one single time in 19 years, seen a ticket like this belong to somebody who looks like you. You understand what I'm telling you?" There it was, the line. The one that, once spoken out loud in front of a crowd, cannot be unheard by anyone standing there. An older woman near the front of the line, silver-haired, traveling alone, with a small wheeled suitcase, opened her mouth as if to say something, then glanced at the agent's name tag then, at the line stretching behind her, and closed it again. Her name was Carol Fenn, and she would think about that closed mouth for the rest of the day, on the plane, in the London airport, in the taxi to her hotel. The 2 seconds where she almost spoke and didn't, she would tell her granddaughter about it that night on the phone. "I should have said something," Carol would say. "I keep thinking about that girl's face." Naomi felt something in her chest go very still and very cold, the way water goes still right before it freezes. She thought of her grandmother's voice. "Rise anyway, baby." She did not cry. She did not raise her voice. She simply said again quietly, "Can you please scan it?" Denise's jaw tightened, and for a second something flickered across her face. Not doubt, not yet, but the faint irritation of someone being asked to do a job she'd rather skip. She slapped the boarding pass against the scanner, hard enough that the machine gave an offended little chirp. It beeped green. A ripple of surprise crossed Denise's face before she smoothed it back into something colder. "Huh," she said, handing the pass back with 2 fingers again, as though touching it longer than necessary might cost her something. "Well, guess the system doesn't always catch what it should." That should have been the end of it. Any reasonable person would have said the machine confirmed the ticket, apologized, and moved on with their morning. Denise Hollis did not do that. Instead, she looked past Naomi to the line and raised her voice. The way someone raises their voice, not to be heard by the person in front of them, but by everyone behind. "Folks, I'm going to need everyone to just be patient a moment. We've got a little situation here we need to sort through before we can keep this line moving." She said it with the weary, long-suffering tone of a woman doing the whole airport a favor, and 6 people in the priority lane exhaled audibly, the kind of exhale that says without saying it, "This is your fault, whoever you are, for making us wait." Naomi felt every one of those exhales land on her like small stones. Then Denise narrowed her eyes and leaned in again, her voice just low enough to sound private and just loud enough to carry. "You traveling with somebody? Because I gotta be honest with you, the profile doesn't fit. Maybe you're some kind of assistant, somebody's nanny, maybe, and they let you use their upgrade voucher. That happens more than you'd think." The word assistant hung in the air. Naomi felt her eyes sting, hot and sudden, and she blinked hard, furious at her own body for betraying her. Denise wasn't finished. She glanced down at the boarding pass one more time, then back up, and something in her expression hardened further, as if she had decided that backing down even an inch now would cost her more than pressing forward. "Actually," she said, tapping one coral-painted nail against the counter, "I think I'm going to need you to step out of this line entirely while we sort this out. Go stand over there, by the pillar, so I can help the passengers who are actually ready to board." She said it the way someone directs a stray animal, one hand already gesturing toward a spot 10 feet away from the counter, in full view of everyone still waiting. For a moment, Naomi genuinely considered obeying, some old, tired instinct in her, rising up to say, "Don't make a scene, just move. It'll be easier." The same instinct that had made generations of women in her family swallow far worse than this, in far worse rooms. Then she thought of the notebook in her backpack, of the Phoenix pin, of 6 years of 5:30 mornings, and she stayed exactly where she was. "I'd rather stand here," Naomi said, "until you scan my ticket again in front of a supervisor, or until you explain to me, specifically, what part of a validated boarding pass requires me to step aside." "I'm traveling alone," Naomi said, her voice thinner now but not breaking. "I'm 17. I won a national engineering competition. My mother works for this airline. I would like you to let me board." Something about that last sentence, "My mother works for this airline," seemed to strike Denise as the funniest thing yet. She actually laughed out loud, a bark of a sound that turned 3 or 4 more heads in line. "Everybody's mother works here today." Apparently, Denise said to no one in particular, playing to the crowd now, performing for them. And Naomi understood with a sick lurch in her stomach that this had stopped being about a boarding pass. This was a show, and Denise was enjoying every second of being its star. You know what? I think this whole thing needs a second look. I'm going to call my supervisor down here. And maybe we'll get airport security involved too, just to be safe. Can't be too careful with forged documents these days. Panic, real and physical, dropped through Naomi's chest like a through water. Security. For a boarding pass that had already scanned green. For being 17 and black and standing where the sign told her to stand. She thought of the London program, starting in 11 days. She thought of her mother's voice that morning. You earned this, baby. And felt, for one terrible moment, like the whole trip, the whole prize, the whole proof that she belonged in rooms like this one, was about to be erased in front of 100 strangers because one woman with a scanner had already decided the answer before she asked the question. There's no need for that, Naomi said, and now her voice did shake, just slightly, just enough that she hated herself for it. Please. My ticket is real. My name is Naomi Carter. Just, please, check the system properly. Naomi Carter, Denise repeated, typing the name into her terminal with sharp, irritated keystrokes, then looking up with a small, satisfied smile already forming, as if she already knew what the screen would say before it said it. Nope, nothing here. No VIP note, no special flag, no nothing. Funny how that works, isn't it? Behind Naomi, the line had stopped moving entirely now. Nobody was checking their phones anymore. Every eye at Gate C34 had turned toward the counter, and Naomi could feel each one of them like a small weight pressing down on her shoulders. Some faces looked sympathetic. A businessman near the front, gray-suited, kept checking his watch with obvious irritation, more annoyed at the delay than at what was causing it. And two college-aged guys near the pillar were outright grinning, filming with their phones held low and sideways. The way people film things they've already decided are entertainment rather than cruelty. This is Marcus Bell's memory of that moment, told later, in a very different room, to a very different audience. I saw it happening. I heard every word of it. And I told myself it wasn't my line, wasn't my counter, wasn't my business to interrupt a colleague in front of a crowd. I kept scanning my own passengers, and I kept my eyes down, and I am not proud of that, and I never will be. That is what silence looks like, when it has a name and a job, and a reason it tells itself is good enough. Marcus Bell would remember that morning for the rest of his career. Keep him in mind. He is going to matter again before this story ends. Naomi, hands trembling now in a way she couldn't hide, pulled her phone from her jacket pocket. I need to make a call, she whispered, stepping half a step back from the counter. Oh, calling for backup, are we? Denise said, folding her arms, thoroughly enjoying herself now. Who's it gonna be, Mommy? The phone rang twice before her mother picked up. Naomi, sweetie, you at the gate already? Renata's voice was warm, a little distracted, the sound of a hallway and a closing door behind her. Mom. Naomi's voice cracked on the single syllable, and 18 months of composure she'd built since her grandmother's funeral seemed to crumble all at once. There's a problem. The gate agent, she won't believe my ticket is real. She said I don't fit the profile for first class. She said I might be somebody's assistant. She's saying she's calling security on me, Mom, and everybody's watching, and I don't know what to do. There was a silence on the other end of the line. Not a long one, maybe 2 full seconds. But Naomi, who had known her mother's voice for 17 years, could hear something shift inside that silence, the sound of a person setting one version of herself down and picking up another. What is the agent's name? Renata said, and her voice had gone very quiet and very, very even. Denise, it says Hollis. D. Hollis. Naomi, listen to me carefully. I want you to put me on speaker, and I want you to hold the phone up so she can hear every word. Don't say anything else to her. Just hold up the phone. Naomi's hands were shaking so badly, she nearly dropped the phone twice, trying to find the speaker icon. When the icon finally lit, she turned back toward the counter and held the phone out, her arm trembling with the effort of keeping it steady. Denise glanced up, annoyance flashing across her face. "You still on that call? I've got other passengers who actually need to board, and if you don't have a—" Denise. The voice that cut through the noise of Gate C34 was not loud. It didn't need to be. It carried the particular, unmistakable weight of someone who has spent 20 years learning exactly how much force a quiet sentence can hold, and it landed across that gate like a hand closing around every conversation in earshot. The two college kids stopped filming each other and turned their phones toward the counter instead. The gray-suited businessman actually looked up from his watch. Marcus Bell froze mid-scan, his own passenger's boarding pass still half raised in his hand. "Who is this?" Denise demanded, though something in her tone had already begun to slip. "My name is Dr. Renata Carter," the voice said, each word delivered with the precision of someone reading a verdict. "I am Naomi Carter's mother. I am also the Executive Vice President of Customer Experience for Windward Air, the airline whose uniform you are currently wearing, and whose gate you are currently standing behind, and whose passenger you have apparently spent the last several minutes humiliating in front of a boarding line." The color drained out of Denise Hollis's face so fast it was almost audible. Her coral lipstick, a moment ago a bright, confident slash of color, now looked garish and clownish against skin gone, the color of old paper. Her hand, which had been resting on the counter with the casual authority of a woman who owned the room, froze completely still. I beg your pardon," Denise stammered, and every trace of the woman who had been performing for a crowd 30 seconds earlier had simply evaporated. "There will be time for pardons," Renata said, and her voice did not rise even a single degree, which somehow made it worse. "I understand you told my daughter she doesn't fit the profile for first class. I understand you accused her of forging a boarding document that your own scanner confirmed as valid. I understand you suggested she might be someone's assistant, traveling on a stolen upgrade. And I understand you threatened to call airport security on a 17-year-old national scholarship winner who did nothing but stand in the line your own signage directed her to. Is that an accurate summary of the last 5 minutes, Ms. Hollis?" Denise's mouth opened, closed, opened again. What came out was a strangled half-syllable, nothing that could be called a sentence. "I'll take that as a yes," Renata said. "I want you to process my daughter's boarding pass immediately, seat 2A. I want her carry-on tagged properly, and then I want you to offer her a real apology, not a performance, an actual apology, for what you just did in front of every single person standing at that gate. You will do all of this right now. Do you understand me?" Denise nodded, a small jerky motion before catching herself. Yes, Dr. Carter. Good. I am currently 11 minutes from Hartsfield-Jackson. I was, before this phone call, sitting in a board meeting discussing new initiatives specifically designed to prevent exactly this kind of incident. You have just given that board a live demonstration of why those initiatives exist. Do not leave your station. Do not call your station manager. I will handle that call myself, personally, when I arrive. You and I are going to have a very thorough conversation, Ms. Hollis, and I would encourage you to spend the next 11 minutes thinking very carefully about how you want that conversation to go. The line went silent except for the low hum of the terminal around them. Somewhere behind Naomi, someone exhaled a long, low whistle. Nobody in that line was pretending to check their phone anymore. "Naomi." Her mother's voice softened, just slightly, just for her. "Give the phone back if she needs anything confirmed on her end. Otherwise, keep me on speaker until that boarding pass is in your hand. I'm not hanging up until I see you." What followed was, in its own way, more excruciating than the insults had been. Denise's fingers, which minutes earlier had slapped the boarding pass onto the scanner with careless contempt, now moved across the keyboard with a frantic, trembling precision, as though the machine itself might turn on her. She printed the new boarding pass twice because her hands shook too badly to align it in the printer the first time. She affixed the priority tag to Naomi's backpack so clumsily that it took her 3 tries to get the strip to stick. And the whole time, Dr. Carter's voice remained on the line, calm, level, occasionally asking a short, pointed question about procedure that Denise answered in single, broken words. Finally, Denise held out the boarding pass and passport, and for one long moment, neither of them moved. Denise's eyes, which had held nothing but cold appraisal 10 minutes before, now held something closer to real fear. Miss Carter, Denise said, and her voice cracked in a way that sounded almost like a plea. I am so sorry. I made a terrible mistake. Please accept my apology. It should have felt like victory. Naomi had imagined, somewhere in the back of her mind during those long, humiliating minutes, that this moment, Denise brought low, Denise afraid, Denise finally saying sorry, would feel like something. Instead, standing there with her boarding pass trembling slightly in her own hand, all Naomi felt was tired in a way that went all the way down to her bones. I'll be there in a few minutes, baby, her mother's voice said gently through the phone. Go find a seat in the lounge. I'm coming to you. Okay, Mom, Naomi said softly, and ended the call. The silence that settled over Gate C34 afterward was the kind that has weight, the kind you could set a hand on. Denise stood frozen behind her counter, her face the color of ash, staring at nothing. Marcus Bell beside her looked like he wanted the floor to open beneath his own feet. The 2 boys who had been filming lowered their phones, slowly, no longer smiling. Naomi turned, tucked her boarding pass into her jacket, touched the phoenix pin on her backpack strap once, the way she always did, and walked toward the entrance of the Windward Air first-class lounge without looking back. But this is where the story stops being about one gate agent's cruelty and starts being about what a cruelty like that costs. Not just the person on the receiving end, but the person who chose, again and again, over 19 years, to believe her own contempt was simply good customer service. Because Denise Hollis's morning was not over. It had barely begun. Renata Carter arrived at Gate C34 exactly 9 minutes later, not 11, walking fast in low heels through a crowd that parted the moment they recognized the corporate badge clipped to her blazer. She was not alone. Beside her walked a man Naomi had never seen in person before, but recognized instantly from company newsletters. Franklin Osei, the Hartsfield-Jackson station director for Windward Air, a broad-shouldered man in his 60s, who moved with the unhurried authority of someone who had spent 30 years managing crises far larger than one gate agent's temper. Behind them, a young woman in a gray blazer carried a tablet already open to an incident log. Renata did not go to her daughter first. She would tell Naomi later that this had been the hardest thing she'd done all year. Walking past her own child to address the situation at the counter before pulling her into a hug. But she needed Denise Hollis to understand, in that exact order, exactly what mattered most. Miss Hollis, Renata said, stopping directly in front of the counter, her voice pitched to carry across the entire boarding area, the same way Denise's insults had carried minutes before. My name is Dr. Renata Carter. We spoke on the phone. This is Franklin Osei, station director. I'd like you to repeat, for him, exactly what you said to my daughter this morning. Word for word, if you can manage it. This was the moment, the exact moment Franklin Osei would say later in a formal statement, when Denise Hollis had a choice. She could have told the truth. She could have said, I looked at a 17-year-old girl and decided, before she said a single word, that she didn't belong in the line she was standing in, and I was wrong, and I am ashamed of myself. That sentence, spoken honestly, might have changed everything that followed. She did not say it. "I was following procedure," Denise said instead, her chin lifting slightly, some flicker of the old defiance creeping back into her voice now that a supervisor was present and the crowd's attention had shifted. "There have been issues with fraudulent upgrades on this route before. I was verifying the ticket. That's my job." "You called security on a scholarship winner whose boarding pass had already scanned as valid," Renata said, her voice not rising, not needing to. "You told her, in front of a line of witnesses, that she didn't fit the profile for first class. You suggested she might be someone's nanny. Which part of that was procedure, Miss Hollis?" "I have discretion," Denise said. And there it was, the sentence that Franklin Ossie would later describe, in his written report, as the moment Denise Hollis sealed her own outcome. "I have discretion on who I need to verify more carefully." That's not discrimination. That's doing my job thoroughly. If people don't like being asked questions, maybe they shouldn't. Franklin Ossie held up one hand, and Denise stopped talking, though not because she agreed with him. "Miss Hollis," he said quietly, "I'd like you to come with me to the operations office." Right now, for a moment, nobody at Gate C34 moved. The boarding announcement chime that had been playing on a loop over the terminal speakers seemed, to everyone standing there, to go strangely quiet, though, of course, it hadn't. It was simply that every other sound in the world had shrunk down to the space between Denise Hollis's silence and Franklin Ossie's still outstretched hand. Marcus Bell had stopped scanning boarding passes entirely now. The passenger in front of him, a young father with a toddler on his hip, had stopped too, watching. Even the two college boys, phones still raised, seemed to understand they weren't filming a joke anymore. Denise's eyes darted from Franklin to Renata to Naomi, who stood a few feet away, watching with an expression that had settled, somewhere in the last 10 minutes, into something quieter than anger. Denise opened her mouth one more time. "I don't think I did anything wrong," she said, and that single sentence, spoken to a station director and an executive vice president in front of a still-watching crowd, was the last thing anyone at Gate C34 heard her say that morning. What happened over the following 6 weeks did not happen because Renata Carter demanded revenge. She would say this later to more than one reporter and more than one internal review board, and she would mean it every time. "I did not want to destroy anyone's life. I wanted my daughter treated the way every passenger deserves to be treated. And I wanted to know if this was one bad morning or one bad pattern. It was a pattern." 2 of the 11 prior complaints came from names the review board would later read aloud in a closed-door meeting, and both of those names belonged to people who, unlike Naomi, never had an executive vice president on the other end of a phone call. One was a 58-year-old nurse named Deborah Whitlock, traveling home to Charlotte after a medical conference, who had been pulled out of the priority line and questioned for 9 minutes about whether her business class upgrade voucher was really hers while her flight boarded without her. The other was a college sophomore named Julian Reyes, flying to visit a dying grandfather in Houston, whom Denise had accused in front of his own mother of using a stolen student discount code. Both complaints had been filed. Both had been closed within 48 hours with the same 3 words: coached, no action. Neither Deborah nor Julian had ever received so much as a phone call telling them what, if anything, had been done. When the review board finally reached out to both of them, 7 weeks after Naomi's flight, it was the first time in almost 2 years that anyone from Windward Air had told them they'd been believed. The internal review that Franklin Ossie opened that same afternoon pulled 22 months of customer complaint records tied to Gate C34 and to Denise Hollis specifically. What the review found was not one incident. It was 11. 11 formal written complaints filed against Denise Hollis over less than 2 years, each one alleging some version of the same behavior. Excessive scrutiny of Black and Latino passengers holding premium tickets. Comments about passengers not fitting a profile at least 3 prior threats to call security over already valid documentation. Every one of those 11 complaints had been logged. Every one of them had been closed within 48 hours, with the same 3 words typed into the resolution field by Denise's direct supervisor, a woman named Paula Simmons. Coached. No action. Paula Simmons, when questioned by the Internal Review Board, said she hadn't wanted to make waves. Denise had been at the airport longer than she had. Denise knew the systems better than anyone on the floor. It had seemed easier, Paula admitted, to smooth each complaint over than to escalate it and risk a difficult conversation with a senior colleague. That is what a pattern looks like from the inside. Not one villain acting alone, but a small chain of people who each decided, individually, that today wasn't the day to make the hard call. Marcus Bell, when the review board reached him, gave a very different kind of statement. "I should have said something that morning," he told them, his voice audibly unsteady on the recording. "I've seen Denise do versions of this before, more than once, and I never once wrote it up. I told myself it wasn't my place. I understand now that not saying anything was its own kind of decision, and I have to live with that." Marcus Bell was not fired. He was required to complete additional training, and he asked, "This detail matters. To be the one who helped write the new bystander reporting protocol the airline rolled out 4 months later, the one that made it explicitly clear that any employee who witnessed discriminatory conduct and failed to report it would face consequences of their own." He became, in his own words, someone who finally understood what silence costs. Carol Fenn, the silver-haired passenger who had almost spoken up in the boarding line, submitted a written statement to the review board 2 days later, unprompted, after seeing a brief internal notice about the investigation posted near the gate agent break room. "I did not say anything that morning, and I have regretted it every day since," her statement read. "What I can tell you is exactly what I heard, word for word, because I have not been able to stop hearing it." Her account matched Naomi's, matched Marcus's, matched the 2 students' phone footage, down to the sentence about profiles. It became, according to Franklin Osie's later report, one of the 3 pieces of testimony that made the 11-complaint pattern impossible to argue away. Denise Hollis was placed on unpaid administrative leave that same day, pending the outcome of the investigation. She was given 3 separate opportunities over the following 2 weeks to submit a written account of the incident. In each of the 3 drafts she submitted, reviewed later by Human Resources, she never once used the word sorry without immediately following it with a justification. "I'm sorry if she felt that way," one draft read, "but I maintain that additional verification was warranted given the circumstances." Another read, "I regret how it looked, but I was doing my job as I understood it." Not one of the 3 drafts contained a sentence that took full, unqualified responsibility for what she had said. That refusal, that small, stubborn insistence on being right, even as the walls came down around her, was, in the end, the thing that finished her. Windward Air's legal and HR teams, reviewing the pattern of 11 prior complaints alongside her refusal to accept accountability in the current one, terminated Denise Hollis's employment on the grounds of gross misconduct and violation of the airline's non-discrimination policy, effective immediately, 31 days after the incident at Gate C34. Paula Simmons received a formal written warning and was moved out of a supervisory role entirely, reassigned to a position with no direct reports. Franklin Osie personally rewrote the airline's complaint escalation policy so that any third documented complaint against a single employee would trigger an automatic mandatory review. No more discretion, no more coaching, no more closing the file and hoping the problem quietly went away. Denise Hollis's life after that 31st day did not collapse all at once, the way a building comes down in a single dramatic instant. It eroded, slowly the way a shoreline erodes. One job application rejected after a background check flagged gross misconduct termination, then another, then a third. She applied to 4 other airlines over the following year. 3 didn't call back at all. The 4th called back only to say, politely, that they'd decided to go another direction. She sold her condominium in Alpharetta in a rushed underpriced sale 9 months later to avoid falling further behind on payments, and moved into a 1-bedroom rental unit 40 minutes farther from the airport she no longer worked at. She was, according to someone who later spoke anonymously to a local business reporter covering the story, working part-time at a retail counter, folding sweaters, 20 years, and one very bad morning, removed from the woman who had once decided who belonged and who didn't at Gate C34. Naomi Carter finished her 6-week research placement at Imperial College London that summer with distinction, presenting an improved version of her water filtration algorithm to a review panel that included 2 working engineers from the very airline whose gate agent had once told her she didn't fit a profile. When her mother called to tell her, gently, about Denise's termination, Naomi sat with the news for a long moment before answering. "I don't feel happy about it," Naomi said finally. "I feel like something that should have been fixed a long time ago finally got fixed. That's different from happy." That sentence stayed with Renata Carter for a long time afterward. She would repeat some version of it months later in a leadership seminar she gave to new station managers across the Windward Air network. Not as a lesson about punishment, but as a lesson about what accountability is actually for. "It isn't about making someone suffer," Renata told the room. "It's about making sure the next 17-year-old with a valid ticket in her hand never has to hold up a phone and beg a stranger to believe her." 6 months after the incident, Naomi Carter stood in the atrium of her high school in front of a small crowd of parents, teachers, and underclassmen, launching a mentorship platform she had built and named after the one small thing that had traveled with her through every version of that terrible morning at Gate C34. The phoenix pin her grandmother had given her. She called the platform Rise Anyway. It connected students of color in STEM fields with mentors who had faced their own versions of being told, in ways loud or quiet, that they didn't fit a profile. Within a year, it had 400 members across 19 states. Deborah Whitlock, the nurse from Charlotte, was one of the first mentors to sign up. She told Naomi, the first time they spoke on a video call, that she had almost not filed her original complaint at all, because 2 years earlier it had felt like shouting into an empty hallway. When she heard, secondhand, what had finally happened at Gate C34, she said it was the first time in a long time she'd felt like the airline had actually been listening the whole time. It had simply taken the right person, on the right morning, holding the phone up at exactly the right angle, for anyone to prove it. At the launch event, Naomi's mother stood near the back of the room rather than at the podium, on purpose. This was Naomi's morning, not hers. But when Naomi finished speaking, and the small crowd began to clap, Renata found herself thinking not about the 11 complaints, or the termination paperwork, or the new escalation policy, with her signature at the bottom of it, but about a single frozen second on a phone call months earlier. The 2 seconds of silence before she'd asked, quietly, "What is her name?" She had not known, in that moment, whether she was about to become someone's advocate or someone's undoing. She had known only that her daughter needed her to be both, if it came to that, and that she would not hang up the phone until it was over. The training materials Windward Air developed after the incident used an anonymized version of what happened at Gate C34 as a core teaching scenario, shown to every new gate agent hired company-wide, alongside a simple written question employees were asked to answer honestly before moving on to the next module. If you had been standing at the counter next to Denise Hollis that morning, what would you have said, and when would you have said it? Marcus Bell helped write that question himself, As for Denise Hollis, her name never appeared publicly in any of it. Not in the training modules, not in the news coverage, not in Naomi's own retelling of the story to friends and mentees over the following years. But inside Windward Air, quietly, in break rooms and training sessions, people still referred to what happened as the Gate C34 incident, and every person who heard the phrase understood exactly what it meant and exactly what it had cost the person at its center. Not because someone with power decided to destroy her, but because, given chance after chance to simply say I was wrong and mean it, she never once did. On the one-year anniversary of that morning at Gate C34, Naomi flew out of Hartsfield-Jackson again. This time for a robotics conference in Chicago, this time in coach by her own choice, sitting beside a 9-year-old girl, traveling with her father who kept sneaking glances at the equations. Naomi was sketching in her notebook. Somewhere around the second hour of the flight, the girl worked up the courage to ask what she was working on. Naomi spent the next 40 minutes explaining filtration coefficients to a 9-year-old, in the simplest words she could find. And when the girl's father thanked her afterward, almost apologetically, for indulging his daughter, Naomi just shook her head. She reminds me of somebody, Naomi said, and left it at that. Naomi Carter kept the boarding pass from that flight, the real one, seat 2A, tucked inside the cover of the notebook she still carries every single day. Not because she needs to prove anything to anyone anymore. She keeps it because of what her grandmother used to say, the words stitched into the small gold wings of the pin that still rides on her backpack strap, through every airport, every conference, every room someone once decided, wrongly, that she didn't belong in. Rise anyway, baby. She always does. If this story moved you, not because of how it ended, but because you recognize someone in it, maybe even yourself, hit like so, it can reach the person who needs to hear it today. Share it with someone who's ever been made to feel like they had to prove they belonged somewhere they'd already earned. And tell me in the comments, have you ever stood in that line on either side of that counter? I read every single answer.